Welcome to our continuing series, Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. Today, nature. From the Mother. It is not by thinking that one can be in contact with nature, for nature does not think. But if one deeply feels the beauty of nature and communes with her, that can help in widening the consciousness. Blessings. 9 November 1969. Love of nature is usually the sign of a pure and healthy being, uncorrupted by modern civilization. It is in the silence of a peaceful mind that one can best commune with nature. Blessings. 13 November 1969. Nature is happy to be beautiful. Nature rejoices at her beauty. Beauty is the joyous offering of nature. Nature has a soul which blossoms very prettily. All in nature is spontaneously generous. Nature has an instinctive thirst for light. Nature knows that one day she will realize. It is man who has rendered nature sorrowful. The so-called forces of nature are nothing but the exterior activities of beings out of proportion with man by their size and by the powers which they wield. This was about a cyclone which struck Pondicherry on 1st May 1966. This cyclone was simply a push from the earth nature to wake up some of our somnolent human children to the necessity of making a progress based on Sri Aurobindo saying, quote, "Materially, you are nothing. Spiritually, you are everything." May 1966. About a cyclone which struck Pondicherry in November 1966. Nature is collaborating in her own way. All is meant for the growth of a spontaneous sincerity. November 1966. One must let things grow just as plants grow in nature. Every too rigid form or limitation we would seek to impose on them before their time would hamper their natural development and would sooner or later have to be destroyed. The divine in nature creates nothing final. Everything is temporary, and at the same time as perfect as it is possible for it to be under the circumstances at the time. In our way of working, we must not be the slaves of nature. All these habits of trying and changing, doing and undoing, and redoing again and again, wasting energy, labor, material and money, are nature's way of action, not the divine's. The divine consciousness sees first the truth of a work, the best way of doing it according to the given circumstances. And when she acts, it is final. She never comes back to what is done. She goes forward, using failure as well as success for a new progress, one more step towards the goal. In order to progress, nature destroys, while the divine consciousness stimulates growth and finally transforms. If you do not feel your responsibility, and if you are not always alert and painstaking, then nature will play mischief with you. If you want to stop the mischief of nature, you have to do your work with exactness and a sense of responsibility. You must not leave anything undone. You must always be careful and alert, and you will be safe. Question put to Mother. Nature is not consciously intelligent? Mother. There is an intelligence which acts in her and through her, in her action, but she is not conscious of this intelligence. You can understand this with animals. Take ants, for example. They do exactly what they have to do. All their work and organization is something which really looks perfect. But they are not conscious of the intelligence which organizes them. They are moved mechanically by an intelligence of which they are not aware. And even if you take the most developed animals, like the cat and dog, for instance, they know exactly what they have to do. A cat bringing up her little ones brings them up just as well as a woman hers. Sometimes better than a woman. But it is impelled by an intelligence which moves it automatically. It is not conscious of the intelligence which makes it do things. It is not aware of it. It can't change anything at all in the movement by its own will. Something makes it act mechanically, but over that it has no control. If a human being intervenes and trains a cat, he can make it change its behavior. But it is the consciousness of the human being which acts upon it, not its own consciousness. It is not conscious of the intelligence which makes it act. And this kind of self-awareness, this possibility of watching oneself acting, of understanding why one does things, how one does them, and therefore of having a control and changing the action, that belongs to the mind and, in his own right, to man. This is the essential difference between a man and an animal, that a man is conscious of himself, that he can be aware of the force which makes him act, and not only be aware of it, but control it. The most binding law of nature is only a fixed process which the Lord of nature has framed and uses constantly. The Spirit made it, and the Spirit can exceed it. But we must first open the doors of our prison house and learn to live less in nature than in the Spirit. There is no law of nature that cannot be overcome and changed if we have thee. The laws of nature are imperative for the physical nature only, so long as this nature is not under the influence of the psychic being, the soul. For the psychic being is in possession of the divine power which can, for its own ends, use all processes and formulas and transform them at will. There is no law of nature that cannot be overcome and changed if we have the faith that all is ruled by the Lord, and that it is possible for us to come into direct contact with Him, if we know how to escape from the prison house of age-old habits and give ourselves unreservedly to His will. In truth, nothing is fixed. Everything is in perpetual change. And this ascending transformation will lead this inconscient and mortal creation back, step by step, to the eternal and all-powerful consciousness of the Lord. 3 August 1969. The most binding law of nature is only a fixed process which the Lord of nature has framed and uses constantly. The Spirit made it, and the Spirit can exceed it, but we must first open the doors of our prison house and learn to live less in nature than in the Spirit. Death, as a fact, has been attached to all life upon earth, but man understands it in a different sense from the meaning nature originally put into it. In man, and in the animals that are nearest to his level, the necessity of death has taken a special form and significance to their consciousness. But the subconscious knowledge in this lower nature which supports it is a feeling of the necessity of renewal and change and transformation. It was the condition of matter upon earth that made death indispensable. The whole sense of the evolution of matter has been a growth from a first state of unconsciousness to an increasing consciousness. And in this process of growth, dissolution of forms became an inevitable necessity as things actually took place. For a fixed form was needed in order that the organized individual consciousness might have a stable support. And yet it is the fixity of the form that made death inevitable. Matter had to assume forms. Individualization and the concrete embodiment of life forces or consciousness forces were impossible without it. And without these, there would have been lacking the first conditions of organized existence on the plane of matter. But a definite and concrete formation contracts the tendency to become at once rigid and hard and petrified. The individual form persisted as a too-binding mold. It cannot follow the movements of the forces. It cannot change in harmony with the progressive change in the universal dynamism. It cannot meet continually nature's demand or keep pace with her. It gets out of the current. At a certain point of this growing disparity and disharmony between the form and the force that presses upon it, a complete dissolution of the form is unavoidable. A new form must be created, a new harmony and purity made possible. This is the true significance of death, and this is its use in nature. But if the form can become more quick and pliant, and the cells of the body can be awakened to change with the changing consciousness, there would be no need of a drastic dissolution. Death would be no longer inevitable. And finally, from Sri Aurobindo. For man alone of terrestrial creatures, to live rightly involves the necessity of knowing rightly, whether, as rationalism pretends, by the sole or dominant instrumentation of his reason, or more largely and completely by the sum of his faculties. And what he has to know is the true nature of being and its constant self-effectuation in the values of life. In less abstract language, the law of nature, and especially of his own nature, the forces within him and around him, and their right utilization for his own greater perfection and happiness, and for that, and the greater perfection and happiness of his fellow creatures. In the old phrase, his business is to learn to live according to nature, from which man has wandered, since it is rather a thing itself changing, progressing, evolving, ascending from height to more elevated height, widening from limit to broader limit of its own possibilities. Yet in all this changing, there are certain principles of truths of being which remain the same, and upon them as bedrock, with them as a primary material, and within them as a framework, our progress and perfection are compelled to take place. Otherwise, there would be an infinite chaos, and not a world ordered even in the clash of its forces. Namaste.